An armed society is a polite society. Manners are good when one may have to back up his acts with his life. Robert Heinlein, American science fiction author, aeronautical engineer, and naval officer. All right. Good morning and welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, I want to especially thank you for giving me your time so early. Now, you might be asking yourself, DL, where were you yesterday? Well, I slept in. No, seriously, not on purpose. It actually was an accident. I just had a little bit of a rough night sleeping, and I woke up early, like 3 a.m. And I was like, all right, this is a little bit too early. And so I laid there for a while, and then I fell asleep. Then my alarm went off, and I was just like totally out of it. And um, I laid there for a minute, and then the next thing I knew, it was like almost 6:30, and I got up and I was like, all right, maybe I can still do this, but I hadn't done my show prep, and I was like, all right, maybe I can try to do some show prep here and just, maybe start a little bit late, and it turned out not to be the case. So I just said, all right, I'm not doing it. So apologies, folks, but I am back today. And well, yesterday the buzz on Twitter, at least from one area, was about his ruling where an illegal immigrant was I'm drawing a blank here for a moment on my own show about the show prep that I just did. Okay, so the district court in Northern Illinois, they ruled that illegal immigrants are protected under the Second Amendment. And this is causing a flurry of just people are just flipping out about this. Like, oh my God, it's an armed invasion. And I'm like, okay, you need to calm down, take a breath, and let's dig in and find out what is going on so that we can determine whether or not we really agree with this or whether we're having a knee jerk reaction that's just like, oh my God, illegal immigrants, guns, what shall we ever do? Because as I'm going to show you, it's really just a bunch of hype and people are flipping out, and they should actually be supporting this, in my opinion. So let's get a news story here and let's see what the news story has to tell us. We'll just kind of get a little bit of an overview of what in the world is going on. Why are we even talking about this?
A judge in Illinois just ruled illegal immigrants have the right to keep and bear arms. So rather than the circle with the line through it, we need like a thumbs up emoji there. The case is pretty simple. Police arrested an illegal immigrant living in Chicago with a gun back in 2020. They charged him for violating the federal law banning illegal immigrants from having guns. Been on the books for a long time. Judge Sharon Johnson Coleman just decided the Second Amendment applies to him, the illegal immigrant, like everybody else, so he can have a gun. In her decision, she wrote that Humberto Flores received and used the handgun solely for self-protection and protection of property during a time of documented civil unrest in the spring of 2020, the summer of love. Court documents show Flores fired the gun at moving cars during the BLM riots in Chicago. He argues police officers warned him about looters who were approaching his neighborhood. Key to this ruling is that the judge says Flores' conduct heavily impacted her decision. He had no criminal record and was not considered a risk to public safety. This case is just one of many challenging that federal statute that prevents illegal immigrants from possessing a firearm.
All right. So basically, background: BLM riots. He had an illegal immigrant. He had a firearm. He presumably was using it lawfully in the context, meaning like he wasn't just out, shooting at people randomly. He was actually using it for the self-defense, as he says, right? However, the relevant statute says, hey, if you're an illegal immigrant, you can't have a firearm, right? And that's that's actually pretty simple. Like we could pull that up here. Let me see if I can't. I didn't add that image to the clip. Let me pull that up really quickly. I can get it right up on screen here so that you can read the relevant statute. Let's see here. So there's that. And then let's give me just a second, get it right there. That works. All right. So here it is. It's, of course I've got to, move that a little bit here. Down, see if that works. Okay. Who, being an alien, is illegally or unlawfully in the United States. So this is under Chapter 44, Firearms in the U.S. Code, 922, Unlawful Acts. So it is an unlawful act to have a firearm if you are illegally or unlawfully in the United States. Pretty simple, right? Like that's what it is. And the case here says, well, no, actually, this man, despite the fact that he's an illegal alien, this is an unconstitutional statute, is what the judge ruled. And we're going to go through the judge's ruling in a minute, because as you know, anybody that listens or watches to my show, they know that I am a big fan of going to the source documents and looking them up and reading them and finding out exactly what's going on. Because a lot of times things get reported, people talk about things, and there's a lot of hype, and so you gotta dig through the hype. And in order to dig through the hype, you need to go to the source documents. So that's what's going on. It's very simple, right? This guy had a firearm. He's protecting himself during the BLM riots. And look, if you watched any media whatsoever, you know that the BLM riots were a big deal, right? All over the country. And a lot of people were like, hey, why isn't somebody doing something about it? A lot of people were supporting the idea that you could defend yourself and your property against rioters and looters, right? Like there was all kind of commentary on that matter. So it seems to me that, well, we're going to get to that in just a moment. We're going to get to the complaints. And speaking of complaints, let me play a clip here. And as I was doing my research, I came across a clip which kind of embodies a lot of the comments that I'm seeing, right? This attitude toward this ruling. So I'm going to play it, and it's actually so what it is. I just happened to come across it. It's like a guy called Veteran Biker, and he's got a channel. Looks like a pretty big channel, so cool. Kudos to him. And he plays a clip from Tucker Carlson, and then he goes right into some of his own commentary. And both clips, the clip of that he plays of Tucker, and the clip of him with his, the introduction to his commentary, both reflect a lot of the commentary that I saw on Twitter and even some debates that I got into myself. So I'm going to play them because I think there's a value in showing these clips that are representative of a lot of the conversation, right? No, normally I try not to play other people's podcasts. I just, unless there's a value there. And I think this is the value. Okay. So let's go ahead and play that.
Federal judges have ruled that illegal immigrants like Heriberto Carvajal Flores and Antonio Singh Ledesma can carry firearms. This astonishing verdict raises a chilling question. Are these rulings a deliberate attempt to foster chaos and undermine public safety? In a world where the Democrats are clamoring for the disarmament of American citizens, these judicial decisions allow illegal immigrants, some with criminal backgrounds, to bear arms. It's as if the scales of justice have been inverted, favoring those who flout our laws over law-abiding citizens.
A federal judge in Illinois has ruled that illegal aliens that come to our country illegally have Second Amendment rights that are protected by the Constitution. Federal judge appointed by Barack Hussein Obama in the state of Illinois has ruled now that illegal aliens can own firearms under the Constitution. I don't know how this works out. They come to our country illegally. They break in. It's like somebody breaking into your house and they have the right to use your microwave. It doesn't work like that. But a federal judge, her name is Sharon Johnson Coleman, on Friday, ruled that a federal prohibition on illegal immigrants owning firearms is unconstitutional. You can't make this up. We are living in a clown world. And I really wish that someone could explain to me how an average American citizen can be limited in what they own, but someone coming to our country illegally, the dark of night, with the help of the coyotes paying to come into our country, be smuggled in to our country from China, from Venezuela, from Nicaragua, from El Salvador, fill in the blank, now from Haiti, fill in the blank of whatever shithole country that you can come up with that hates us, can come into our country through the dark of night and have their ability to own a pew-pew, a firearm, protected by the Second Amendment.
All right. Well, I will do just that. I will explain to you how this works. And I will explain to everyone that bears the attitude of Tucker Carlson or this gentleman here, veteran biker. I will explain using two documents, right? Like how this works. And he's a veteran, so presumably he's familiar with the first document, which is the US Constitution. Read it. It tells you a lot of cool things. The second is the actual ruling. See, and the issue that I'm taking here is that there are so many people that have this attitude like, well, how can they have it? Well, I don't know. Did you read the document? Did you read it, or did you just read the news story and flip out because it was an immigrant? Right? Is that your beef, that you don't want immigrants to have any rights? Because if that's your beef, then just say so, and you don't have to spend all this time asking crazy questions that could have been answered had you read stuff, right? And I wouldn't be so snarky about it, except for this happens all the time, and it happens by so many people. So many people kind of get this huffy puffy attitude. And it's very clear that they haven't even tried to read and understand why. Instead of, they want to say like, what was it? He was like, Barack Hussein Obama. Like, we all know why you're saying that, right? Nobody talks about someone else and uses their middle name. Like when we were growing up, your mom would be like, James Johnny Smith, right? And you knew when she threw that middle name in there, like you were in trouble. Like that was a big deal. Like people use your middle name when you're in trouble, or when they're trying to insult you, or in some other way like that, right? Like like we're not having an honest conversation right off the bat. You know, we're talking about like, oh, all these countries hate us. Actually, a lot of people don't hate us. That's why they want to come here. Illegal immigrants aren't coming here because they hate you. Like that doesn't even make sense. They're not coming here going through potentially dying to try to cross the border, working illegally in sometimes harsh conditions where they don't have a lot of recourse so that they can what? Own you? Like that's the point? Like no, this is absurd, right? And Tucker was no better. Now I don't have any issues with either one of these two gentlemen necessarily, but I do think that this particular attitude right now that we're having that we just watched um, is something that needs to be addressed, and maybe we need to be a bit critical of it, right? We need to be critical when people aren't doing their due diligence when it comes to understanding laws and regulations and how we treat each other. All right, so enough of my grandstanding on that. Let's get into it. Let's talk about what it is that what can we learn from these actual documents. So one of the comments that I pointed out, I said, look, and I don't remember the exact quote that I made, but basically my comment on Twitter was something like, the Constitution distinguishes between people and citizen accurately. And so if you look at the Constitution, you're going to notice that there are certain areas where it says citizen, and there are certain areas where it says people or person. So here's a copy of the Constitution, a PDF document. Let's pull it up here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus on the Bill of Rights, because if you search the Constitution for like the words citizen or for the words people or person, you're going to get quite a few you get quite a few results. And so what we want to do is we kind of want to focus on just a few of them just to kind of get an understanding. So here is like we've got the First Amendment. Okay. And in the First Amendment here, we can see that it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Okay. So this right off the bat, which of the people. And if we go to the very beginning, right? Well, not that beginning, that's just the cover page of the document here. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, so on and so forth, right? So we start off with this notion, we, the people. But we do get to a point where we start talking about citizens. So, Second Amendment, well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Jump down to the Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, effects, so on and so forth, right? So, and you can keep going through the Ninth Amendment, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. 10th Amendment, the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. So now let's find where we talk about citizens, right? All right. So here under, okay. So here we've got under the Fourth Amendment, 14th Amendment, not the fourth. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction. So all persons born or naturalized in the United States, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States. So now in the 14th Amendment, we're clarifying what a citizen is. So it says all persons, but it's not just all persons. You have to be born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. You are a citizen. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens in the United States, right? So we're clearly pointing out there's a distinction between persons or people and citizens, because we're clarifying what kind of person may be a citizen. You can think of it as you have a circle, and that circle represents all the people. And inside that circle, you have another circle, and that circle represents citizens, right? And so you have this people that, and I wish I had a graphic to show you, but that's effectively what you got. It's a group within a group. Citizens are a group within the group of people or persons, however you want to do it. Let's see. I've got a bunch of them here, so we'll try to find some. Let's see here. Let's see here. Let's see here. I'm trying to find ones that are that I don't have to read too much to make it make it understandable. Here it is. The 19th Amendment. Okay, the right to vote. Again, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Okay. So it's explicitly, now here we're not saying people or persons. And we all know that you have to be a citizen in order to vote. You don't get to vote if you're not a citizen. But if you, let's say you're a legal resident, okay, let's just break this down a little bit. You're a legal resident. You come over here, maybe you have a green card. You cannot vote, but you pay taxes. You can engage in legal documents. You can sign legal documents, right? You can work here. You can live here. You can do a lot of things as a green card holder, because we distinguish between people and we distinguish between citizens. And the way that we look at the proper way that we look at the Constitution is that things that are reserved for citizens are like a special privilege, but they're not rights. They're a special privilege. The right to vote is a special privilege. I mean, I know it says the right of citizens to vote, but it's not an inherent right. It's not the same as the Second Amendment, which if we go back, let's go back to that real quick here. That was on, I think, page 12. Yes, perfect. Look at that. I'm good. All right. So Amendment 2 here. It says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, why is that? Well, as it turns out, when you look at history, the founders kind of observed that there were certain rights that just existed. And that's what the Bill of Rights does. The Bill of Rights puts a limitation on government on what they can, on any way that they can or cannot prohibit or prevent you from exercising said right. So, for instance, First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. So these are inherent rights that you have. You have the inherent right to religion, to worship how you please. That's an inherent right. Congress, they can't make any law that says Protestants are better than Catholics. They also cannot abridge your freedom of speech, because your freedom of speech is an inherent right. You have the right to say what you want. I can say the president of the United States is an old man who's apparently falling into dementia and needs to be removed. I can say that all day long. I can say any nasty thing I want about him because I have that right. It's an inherent right. I also have the right to free press, right? I can report on these things. I can talk about it. I also have the right to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So I could go outside City Hall and yell and scream and say, hey, you guys better do this thing. You guys are wrong and you need to hear me, blah, blah, blah. Like, those are inherent rights. And they're not rights that are based on any group status. It's the people. Any people that are within the United States jurisdiction have these rights. And when people start complaining and saying, well, how can illegal immigrants, you know, they got the Second Amendment right? Well, what is the Second Amendment right based on? It is based on this idea that you have the right to defend yourself against anyone, even the government. So the question is, do you lose that right of self-defense because you violated some other law that's unrelated to it whatsoever? That would be absurd. I mean, if you really think about it, it's absurd to think that this right that Americans really hold dear, which is the right of self-defense, defending yourself against a criminal, against somebody else. Or put it in this context. How about this? Let's think of it, two citizens. Let's not think of it as illegal immigrants. Two citizens. Both of them are committing a crime, right? They're both trying to rob a house together. And then one guy decides that he's going to shoot the other guy so that he can have all the goodies. And the guy defends himself and shoots the other guy. So guy A and guy B are both robbing a house together. We've seen this in the movies, right? Guy A and guy B are robbing a house together. And guy A decides he's going to shoot guy B so he can have all the loot. Guy B figures it out and shoots him, in self-defense. The gunshot maybe causes a commotion. People call the police. The police come out. They arrest the man. Should he be charged with shooting the other criminal who was trying to kill him in the act? Like, does he give up his right to self-defense? A legitimate right of self-defense. I mean, he's not defending himself against a homeowner who's, he's defending himself against another criminal who is illegally trying to harm him, right? Because guy A is also a criminal. He's not the homeowner. If it had been the homeowner, it'd be a different story. But in this particular hypothetical here, guy A is a criminal stealing from a homeowner. Guy B is also a criminal stealing from a homeowner. Guy A decides, you know what? I want all the loot. I don't want to split it at all with you. So I'm going to shoot you. Well, he has no more right to shoot the guy because he's not shooting him in defense of the property. He's shooting him so he can steal it. So he's committing a crime. So all you got to do is just kind of read some of these documents and think through it a little bit. And I've got something here. I'm not going to put it up on the screen, but I'm going to read it just because as I was doing my research, I came across this and it was a really interesting, the way it was written was really good. And I'm going to read it. It's a Quora answer on what is the difference between the people and citizens in the U.S. Constitution. And here's what it says. In this, I'm not sure who it is exactly. It says prime legal. I don't, but anyway, it says, though the terms the people and the citizens are used interchangeably, they refer to different aspects. In the U.S. Constitution, the people generally refers to the collective population of the United States, including both citizens and non-citizens. The Constitution's preamble famously begins with "We the people," which signifies that the authority of the government is derived from the population as a whole. Throughout the Constitution, the term "the people" is used to convey the idea of a democratic government accountable to all residents, regardless of citizenship status. However, the term citizens specifically refers to individuals who hold legal citizenship within the United States. Citizens have certain rights and responsibilities that are protected and outlined by the Constitution, such as the right to vote, the right to hold public office, and certain due process protections. Certain provisions in the Constitution, such as the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, are explicitly focused on citizens and their rights. I think this is a great way to state it. And if you really think about it, when this response, when it said that, where did it say? That throughout the Constitution, the term "the people" is used to convey the idea of a democratic government accountable to all residents, regardless of citizenship status. I want you to think about it. Do you think about another scenario here? Let's say that I'm a citizen, which I am, and then let's say I'm interacting with somebody who is a green card holder. They are not a citizen. let's say that I assault them. I just get mad and I start beating them up. Do they have the right to defend themselves against me? Or would you argue and say, well, no, this person doesn't have that right because they're not a citizen, right? This is the point. The point is that there are certain parts of the Constitution that are applicable to the people in general because they are an inherent right. They precede the Constitution. They came before. They exist naturally. You naturally have the right to self-defense. Therefore, it makes sense that if you're a green card holder, you have the right to self-defense. If you are an illegal immigrant, you have the right to self-defense against somebody that's trying to do you harm unlawfully, right? Now, if you're an illegal immigrant and you're breaking into somebody's home and they shoot you, that is them exercising their self-defense. You don't have a right of self-defense any more than if a citizen were breaking into somebody's home and were shot by the homeowner. This is how rights actually work. And then, of course, it points out that citizens have certain rights that are protected, outlined in the Constitution, such as the right to vote, the right to hold public office. For example, if you were not born in the United States, you are not eligible to be president. Period. Right? You can't even be naturalized and become a president of the United States. Now, you can hold other public offices, but you can't hold that one. So our Constitution, our laws already make a distinction between citizens and between people who are non-citizens. So what this law does is it says, well, you can't own a firearm if you're an illegal immigrant. And that's what the judge went ahead and made the ruling against. So let's go ahead and let's pull up the judge's ruling, and we're going to walk through that because it's actually pretty simple, just as much as the Constitution is. All right. So here we go, and let me set it up so that I can read it here. All right. So memorandum, opinion, and order. So we're going to scroll down here. The court. This is under the section background. The court presumes familiarity with its April 13th, 2022 order denying Carbajal Flores' first motion to dismiss. As relevant here, on June 1st, 2020, Carbajal Flores possessed a handgun in the Little Village neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. Carbajal Flores contends that he received and used the handgun for self-protection and protection of property. Because of Carbajal, I must just say Mr. Flores. Because of Mr. Flores' citizenship status, he was charged in violation of USC 922G5, which prohibits any non-citizen who is not legally authorized to be in the United States from possessing or affecting commerce any firearm or ammunition, or to receive any firearm or ammunition which has been shipped or transported in interstate or foreign commerce. All right. So we scroll down. I'm going to skip past some of the stuff. This is more of the legal background. It's basically like, I think the guy tried like 3 times and they denied the first 2. Basically, he was saying like, look, based on this case, the ruling is incorrect. Based on this case, the ruling is incorrect. And it was ruled against him. They were saying like, look, those cases are not relevant here. But then we get to a third case where it does become relevant. And that's in this case called Atkinson. In Atkinson, the Seventh Circuit clarified the analysis demanded by Bruin's text and history test in considering whether Section 922G1 is constitutional. As guidance, the Seventh Circuit proposed a set of interrelated and non-exhaustive questions that may help focus the proper analysis. So basically, in the Atkinson case, they clarify what the Bruin case put forward, which was this text and history test. So what they do is they want to test whether something is constitutional by looking at what does the text say and what does the history behind it say. So they ask a couple of questions, and questions 1 and 5, I believe, were considered. Let me see here. Let me look through here. Questions 1 and 4 are general enough to be asked of any statute. Questions 2, 3, and 5 are specific questions in the context of 922G1, so on and so forth. So we're going to look at some of these questions that were outlined here. So Does the statute address a general societal problem that has persisted since the 18th century? If this problem existed during a relevant historical period, did earlier generations address it with similar or materially different means? In other words, when we're looking at a statute, how was how, how did earlier generations treat it closer to the text of the Constitution? That is a good test, because the idea here is that what we want is we want to make sure that we're exercising the Constitution in the same way that it was understood by the people who wrote it. So you go back in time and you say, what did people do back then? How did they treat things back then? This is this text and history test. All right. And then they said number 4, if the parties historically inquiry identifies analogous laws, do those laws apply enough of a historical tradition to support? On this front, the parties should provide details about the enforcement, impact, and judicial scrutiny of these laws to the extent possible. In other words, what they're saying is there enough information historically for us to kind of get a sense of how it was understood at that time? So moving forward here. All right, down here. So Second Amendment under this section here, Second Amendment B. In Bruin, the Supreme Court established a framework for analyzing whether a challenged firearm regulation violates the Second Amendment. First, Bruin instructs courts to determine whether the Second Amendment's plain text covers an individual's conduct. If it does, the conduct is quote, presumptively protected. And the government bears the burden of demonstrating that the challenge regulation is, quote, consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. So in other words, if we read the Second Amendment just plainly, just a plain reading, we're not looking at anything else, do we see that this seems to cover a particular situation, a given situation? If it does, then what we have to do is when there's a challenge to a regulation, we have to say, is that regulation consistent with historical tradition of firearm regulation? In other words, did they do the same thing way back then? Well, here's what the court did. Here's what was her name? Trying to remember her name now. Judge Sharon Johnson Coleman did. So let's go back to that real quick. Oops, a little bit lower. All right, so let's see, going down here. Yeah, here we go. The government argues that the historical record establishes the legislature's categorically disarmed individuals who are not members of the political community and individuals who threaten the social order through their untrustworthy adherence to the rule of law. That's what I've highlighted, but I'll keep reading. Not that part. But the court now turns to Carbajal Flores as applied challenge to Section 922 G5's constitutionality. This court found that the British loyalist example in the untrustworthy adherence to the law historical analog contained an exception allowing British loyalists to sign loyalty oaths. This exception necessarily requires an individualized assessment to determine if the former British loyalist is so untrustworthy or dangerous that they should be barred from possessing a weapon. In other words, let's put this all together. What does all of this mean? The current statute says if you're an illegal immigrant, you can't have a firearm. You can't own one. And it's being challenged by an illegal immigrant saying, hey, that's unconstitutional. So then we apply this test and we say, all right, what does the plain reading say? Well, the plain reading seems to suggest, right, because there's no indication that it applies only to citizens, that it applies to people. And we walked through the Constitution and we talked about the distinction between people and citizens. So according to a plain reading of the Second Amendment, it applies to people. Great. That's the first test. Now the second test is there any historical tradition that says that certain people who are not citizens cannot have a firearm? Well, as it turns out, there is. There were British loyalists in the country. And British loyalists were generally not permitted to have a firearm. However, there was an exception for those who were willing to sign a loyalty oath. See, I think that's all that I highlighted on this. Oh, no. The government argues that Carbajal Flores is a non-citizen who is unlawfully present in this country. Okay, so that's not in dispute. The court notes, however, that Carbajal Flores has never been convicted of a felony, a violent crime, or a crime involving the use of a weapon. Even in the present case, Carbajal Flores contends that he received and used the handgun solely for self-protection and protection of property during a time of documented civil unrest in the spring of 2020. In other words, he was exercising the right exactly as we understand it. He was using a firearm to defend himself and his property. Now, if that's in question, that's another matter. But as of this moment, it is not in question. So now we look back and we see this man here was otherwise following all the laws. He was not considered a threat. The only law that he has broken that has been described here is the fact that he came here illegally. That's it. Otherwise, he was following all laws, right? There's no other laws that he has broken that might say, okay, like if he was a felon, right? Citizens who are felons do not get the right to firearms. Therefore, it would make sense to include him as well. You certainly wouldn't say, well, you're a non-citizen, so this law doesn't apply to you. No, it does apply to you in the same way. All right. So this is what the ruling said. And I think that was all that I highlighted. Yeah, that was it. This is what the ruling said. The ruling said, hey, based on other court rulings, which require a particular test, a twofold test, a test of what does the Constitution say, and how did we handle this kind of a situation historically? Based on those two tests, the judge ruled that it was unconstitutional to prevent an illegal immigrant from having a firearm. So from my perspective, the Constitution, the judge has made the right call based on the Constitution, based on precedent, based on things that citizens enjoy. We as citizens enjoy the fact that when it comes to the question of whether or not the government can regulate a firearm, one of the tests is, okay, what does the text say? The second one is, what was historical? Now, I would argue that there are quite a few laws that wouldn't pass the historical test. So from my perspective, this is actually a good thing because now citizens can use this and say, well, based on this court ruling, British loyalists were allowed to have firearms if they took, there's history on the British loyalist owning firearms in some cases, because that's how it was treated in those times. So now we can look and say like bump stocks and other types of additions to our weaponry. Is there any kind of historical history that says these kind of things were barred from people owning? Well, no, there's not. And we're not going to get into that, but there's and I think I've posted, I think I've tweeted out some things, there is some history where people owned cannons and a puckle gun, which is basically like a fully like the first automatic machine gun, right? Like these were kind of weapons that people owned back in the 1800s. And so the idea that we cannot own very dangerous weapons doesn't pass the historical test. Because we have examples of it in the same way that we have examples that some people who were British loyalists. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Which is worse, a British loyalist or somebody who didn't come over here through the insanely complicated process? Which one's worse to you? Think about that for a second. I mean, we love to use the term redcoat, right? Like, oh, that person's a redcoat. But we don't. It wouldn't make sense to apply it to an illegal immigrant. And an illegal immigrant wants to come here, wants to be in some way part of this society, because we got an awesome society. That's why. So, which is worse, a redcoat or an illegal immigrant? And I challenge you to honestly say an illegal immigrant. Now, if an illegal immigrant has come here and they're doing violent acts of crime, well, yeah, that person's a terrible person, and we should ship them right on back. No problems with that whatsoever. But we're not talking about that. In this particular case, the man used it for self-defense. And I remember a whole lot of libertarians and a whole lot of conservatives who were saying things like the way to deal with BLM riots is rooftop Koreans. Heard a lot of you saying that, but now all of a sudden you don't want them rooftop Koreans. And you know, some of them rooftop Koreans may or may not have been here legally. Throwing that out there for you folks. Just saying. So from my perspective, the constitutionality of an illegal immigrant having a firearm, it is totally constitutional. In the same way that they say they have the right to redress, to the right to press, the right to free speech. They have, they have a lot of rights because these rights are inherent and it's compatible with how we understand and apply the law as it is today. So that's the first element. Second element is because now that we've taken care of the constitutional view, the constitutional / legal view, let's talk about the libertarian view, because I saw some libertarians and they were kind of aghast over this. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Why are you aghast? Libertarianism is founded on a very simple idea, the right that of self-ownership. You own yourself, period. That means you own your labor as well. We're not going to get into the labor element of it, but you own yourself. Because you own yourself, you can decide what happens to you. I can decide if I want to go and join a boxing, participate in a boxing match, or I can decide not to. I can decide if I want to go swimming in a lake or a pool, or I can decide I don't want to, right? I can decide if I want to eat gluten-free bread, or if I just want to just chug down tons of, glutinous, whatever. I don't know. I'm just making stuff up, but you get the point. The point is, I have sole control over my body. And anybody that tries to threaten my body, that means I have the right to self-defense. That is an inherent right that supersedes any laws when it comes to libertarian ideas. So for libertarians, the right to self-defense supersedes any law on this planet. No law on this planet can take away my right to self-defense. Now, we also say, if you have the right to self-defense, you have the right to choose whether to defend yourself or not. So if somebody breaks into my home and I'm here by myself and they point a gun, they say, give me your TV, I have the right to decide whether I want to fight them or give them the TV. Now, we're not talking about which is a wiser decision. We're just talking about what I have the right to do, because it is my body. I can choose whether I want to take the risk to be shot. Since I have that right, I also have the right to choose how I will defend myself. Do I want to use my bare fist? Do I want to use a rock, a fork, a knife? I can choose any instrument that I want to defend myself, because it is my body and I can choose to defend it how I please. Maybe I'm into martial arts and I hate weapons. And so I just want to do it barehanded, right? And I take many Kung Fu lessons and let's say I become a grandmaster at Kung Fu, because that's how I choose to defend myself. I will defend myself barehanded because I hate guns, right? Well, that's my choice. You may consider it an unwise choice, but it's not your choice to make. My choice. So, constitutionality, I think, is a check. Libertarianism, also a check. And I would argue that I don't really care how conservatives see it. I think that they're being hypocritical, personally, but I think that no libertarian should oppose this ruling. Every libertarian should support it, because this is literally exactly what many of us were complaining about in 2020. Hey, people have the right to defend their persons and property. And if that person owns some property, he bought something legally from not legally per se in the context of you're an illegal immigrant, but the manner of the purchase itself was legal, right? Like an illegal immigrant comes to me and says, I would like to buy your bicycle. And I say, give me $50 and you can have it. And he gives me $50 and I give him a bicycle. That transaction was, for all intents and purposes, a legal transaction. I had the authority to make the transaction with the bicycle. He had the authority to take that $50 and pass it to me. Nobody else was affected, right? And then if somebody wants to steal his bicycle, he can defend against somebody trying to steal that bicycle because that ownership has been transferred from me to him. I had the authority to transfer that ownership of the bicycle to him, right? I'm just making an example here. I don't know exactly what property he was defending or if he was just defending himself. I'm not entirely certain. Okay. But the point here is he has that right of self-defense. He has the right to defend the property that he owns. And no libertarian should ever oppose this because we had big problems with the fact that there were riots and people weren't defending themselves. Right. So it would also make us hypocrites, but I think it would also, the greater problem here for libertarians would that it would be violating the entire foundation of our principle when it comes to guns and self-defense and self-ownership. All right. So I think we've covered libertarians it's pretty easy. Like that's the libertarian view. You own yourself. You have the right to self-defense, period. Now let's move on to practicality. Like what's the practical view of this? Like let's just think about it in terms of practicality. Because a lot of people are like, well, it's an armed invasion. Okay, for starters, the ruling said that this particular man who was already here had the right to this to own a firearm. He was already here. And part of that ruling was based on the fact that he was otherwise not engaged in criminal acts. Okay. That's distinct from whether or not a large number of people are crossing the border with firearms. That's an entirely different scenario. And there are, I don't know the laws, but I assume that there are laws in place about traveling across the border with a firearm. I know we have them within the states, and I assume very much so. I don't know the specific statute, but I assume that there are laws that cover the border of the United States as a whole, right? So that's this ruling does not apply to that. This ruling says, once you are here, you're already in here, do you have the right to own a firearm? Period. That's it. That's what it says. And part of the basis is based on your behavior here. Now, whether or not people are coming across the border is a question of facts. I'm sorry. Whether or not people are coming across the border armed is a question of facts. Prior to this ruling, nobody was saying we're under attack. It's an armed invasion. They might have been saying it's an invasion, and that's something that we can have an argument about, but they weren't calling it an armed invasion. This ruling doesn't magically make it all of a sudden an armed invasion. This ruling doesn't magically make us under threat because supposedly now people are coming across the border with firearms and they're going to invade and take over. Like that is absolute absurdity. And anybody talking like that needs just two things, one of two things. Laugh them out the door or ignore them into obscurity. Because they're not even talking practical. They're not even talking reason, but they're not even making sense. Just like I'm reminded of the quote by Christopher Hitchens. And he said, that which can be presented without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. If you tell me that there are tons of people now, all of a sudden, like because of this ruling, if you are telling me that all of a sudden there are armed people coming across the border, I want evidence. And without evidence, I don't even have to listen to you any further because you're just making stuff up and you're trying, it's engaging in fear mongering, and I'm not going to have it. Now, practically speaking, do we want illegal people, illegal immigrants to have firearms, like just practically? Why say yes? So I want you to think about this. Think about the quote that I said, an armed society is a polite society. We all know that if you're a criminal, you're going to do criminal things. You don't really care about the law. It's pretty well established. Most everybody would agree. And we say that in the gun debate all the time. Criminals, the gun debate is, should we have more restrictions on firearms? And people will argue and say, well, no, we shouldn't. And these laws aren't going to apply to criminals anyway, because they're going to do whatever the heck they want. And it's only going to be applicable to all the citizens who are now going to be less armed. So in that same vein, if you're an illegal immigrant and you're trying to follow the law, other than the illegal immigrant portion of it. But if you're otherwise trying to follow the law, then you aren't one of those people that we think of as you're going to go and get a gun anyway. Or you can think of it like this. This ruling does not make a criminal any more likely to get a gun. The criminal was already going to get a gun. So any illegal immigrants over here that are committing crimes, like real crimes, crimes against persons or property, they're robbing, they're stealing, they're assaulting people, they're maybe killing people. Those people, they already were going to get a gun if they wanted it. But the people who are here, again, otherwise trying to live and assimilate in our society, a lot of them aren't acquiring a gun because they're trying to fly under the radar. So they're going to commit the fewest crimes possible, right? They're going to, like this Carbajal Flores gentleman, from what it seems so far, he, other than illegally coming into the country, he was otherwise trying to follow the law and be a productive citizen. And that puts him in the same category as anybody else who's trying to follow the law generally, speeding and other things aside. And they're trying to be a good citizen. Good morning, Mr. Producer. My producer's here. What that means is the more people of that caliber are armed, the less dangerous the people that want to do us harm are. Because I want people who are otherwise trying to be good, productive members of this society to be armed so that they are prepared to handle somebody who is not trying to be a productive member of this society. In other words, I want to even the odds against the criminals, the real criminals, the violent criminals, the ones that we actually have to worry about. People like Carbajal Flores is not the kind of, those people aren't the ones that we worry about. We may gripe about the fact that they came here illegally, but other than that, we're not actually really worried about them. These are the people that go to work, they do a job, they come home, they're not speeding, they try to follow the law every other which way possible. These are the people that I want in society, and I want them armed so that the people that are, again, who would do us harm, who don't care about the laws in the first place and are doing whatever the heck they want. I want those people to be on notice that there's plenty of us. And let me put it this way. Let me give you a scenario. Let's say that, and I'm making something up entirely. Let's say my neighbor was an illegal immigrant. Let's say there were several of them, right? Legal immigrants, my neighbors, right? They're not here legally. They're otherwise following the law, right? They go to work, they do their job, they don't speed, they don't harass people, they turn down their music at night, so on and so forth. They're doing all the right things. Let's say somebody breaks into my home while I'm not here and my family is here. They break into my home. Let's say I'm on a trip. My wife and my son and my mother-in-law are here. Someone breaks into my home, and that illegal immigrant happens to catch that. And let's say they grab their firearm, their pistola that they have, and they come rushing over and they shoot the intruder. I'm happy. I want that. I want somebody who is trying to be a productive member of society to be in a position to defend other productive members of this society. So on a practical level, that's what I want. Yes. And I will support that person with every fiber of my body, because that is the kind of person I want to live next to. I don't want to live next to, I don't care that they may have came here illegally, right? Like, I get it. We have that law and we can have that conversation. I don't care about that so much as, what kind of neighbor are you? Are you the kind of neighbor that I don't have to worry about? Are you the kind of neighbor that might actually defend me? Because that's the kind of neighbor I want. And it doesn't matter whether you're natural born, foreign born, naturalized, green card, illegal. I don't care. I want the person that I can trust to live next to me, the person that I can trust to be a good neighbor, whatever that means, however it plays out. And if it plays out to the point where they defend my family because they own a firearm, absolutely. And I think every reasonable person in this country would say the same thing. Ask yourself, would you be angry that an illegal immigrant defended your mom, your dad, your husband, your wife, your child? Would you be angry at them? Would you say, no, they shouldn't have had a gun in the first place? No, you would be happy. You know it, and I know it. Now, what does this have to do with borders? I think we need to be careful when we're looking at different ideas. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the borders because that could be a very long conversation. And my producer's here. It's time for me to go, so on and so forth. But I want to touch upon it very, very quickly. Because a lot of people are like, well, should we be open borders? Should we be closed borders? I am an Ellis Island kind of person. In my view, the best immigration system would be one where immigrants can come here and we simply, the simple test is, are you a violent criminal? Are you a known violent criminal? If you are, we turn you away. Do you have a communicable disease, a serious communicable disease, right? Like not a cold, not the flu, a serious communicable disease. Well, then we turn you away, come back when you don't have it, right? And I make an exception on that note for anybody that's coming over here that might be working with one of our great hospital institutions or medical institutions, right? So if the Mayo Clinic has said, hey, we're bringing this person over here to try to help them with their very serious communicable disease, then I'm okay with that. Mayo Clinic, you're responsible. We're good to go. So that's my version of immigration. Okay. There are versions where you have open borders and closed borders, and they vary in context. Like some people will say they're very, very open borders, like no restrictions whatsoever. And then some who are like mostly open borders, maybe some limited ones, very similar to like an Ellis Island style. And then you have your closed borders who are saying, nope, you can't come in unless you follow this path, whatever, or maybe you can't come in at all. Maybe they don't want any immigrants, right? But that varies as well. I think this case kind of puts into question how people think about the open borders, closed borders, right? Now, it doesn't apply to me so much because I'm Ellis Island and I'm sticking with it. I'm sticking with it because, well, we have history that shows that it works and it works well. So I'm good with it. I'm comfortable with it. And I personally think that when you have a more open system, you actually reduce the crime, the criminal element that comes here. It's the same with anything else. The more restrictions you have on something, the more of a black market that you will have. Well, the way to get rid of the black market for immigration is to open it up a bit. Now, I'm not fully open borders, but I'm Ellis Island. And I say, like, look, if you can come over here and demonstrate that you're going to be a productive member of society, that's ultimately what I want. But I think that when we look at this particular case, we can see that, hey, you know what? You have the right to self-defense no matter who you are. And in the libertarian community, we also have this concept of the right of the freedom of movement, right? I can go places where I want, and the government should not be able to stop me. In other words, the simple version is I could walk across the street to my neighbor's house and the government should not be able to stop me, right? I could decide that I don't want to live in Florida anymore and I can move to New Hampshire, for example, and the government shouldn't be able to stop me because I have the right to movement. And maybe the people of New Hampshire really want me to be there. Maybe, and some of them actually do, but maybe they want me to come there and be a productive member of society. Well, I have that right. And then you also can consider this right of movement in and out of the United States. And we should enjoy that right as well. So I think this case puts us in a position where maybe we start rethinking the open borders, closed borders. And I know a lot of the closed border folk, their big issue is the monetary drain that is expected, right? And that comes from the use of various social services. And there's plenty of arguments about whether or not, illegal immigrants use more services than citizens, but there's no argument that they do use services, right? So like that in itself is still a problem. But I want you to think of it like this. Maybe the issue isn't so much a welfare system or the various services that might get used. Maybe the better angle to attack is regulation. Regulation on the immigrants, right? make it easier for immigrants, why shouldn't a man from Mexico who's good at plumbing not have the opportunity to come over here and start a plumbing business? Why not? Should be able to, right? He's going to be a productive member of society. Why not? No reason he can't. So we should make that process as easy for him as possible. And then once he's here, we should make the process of him trying to make a living also as easy as possible. And I think that's where regulation comes into play. There are an awful lot of regulations in this country, and they vary. Some of them vary from state to state. You've got a lot of regulation when it comes to licenses. Like there are some states where, you've got to get a license to be a barber or to be a hairdresser, right? And these seem like absurd things. So maybe the answer here, because if we're looking at it from the context of the more limitations there are, the greater there is a black market. Well, if we want to diminish that black market, maybe, and we don't want people to consume social safety nets, welfare, then maybe the better angle is to say, let's get rid of some of this regulation. Let's make it easy for people to come over here and work and make a living and not even need to use the welfare system. So you don't even have to worry about tackling it. And I think that may actually be the better answer. That may be the better approach. All right, let's get to some comments here. It looks like there's a few comments in the line. I'm going to skim down through here, and we're just going to, excuse me, we will skim through and see if there's any comments. Let's see what we got here. Let's make this a little bit bigger so that I can see it. Good morning to you, time surfing alien. Hope you're not illegal. Just kidding. That's a joke. Let's see what else we got here. Let's see here. I like this one right here. Keith Garrett says, I do not even pretend to be a historian. I think it's always good for all of us to be humble. I'm certainly no historian, and it's okay to not be a historian. It's okay to admit, hey, I'm not a historian, but that doesn't mean that we individually can't go and just read stuff and learn about stuff, right? Like until I read this case, I was not aware, because I'm not a historian, I was not aware that there were British loyalists who were prevented from having firearms, but then also in certain cases were permitted to have firearms. I didn't know that until I read this case. And this is my point. Like, we need to start reading these bills. We need to read the Constitution. We need to understand what's going on before we go on at the mouth and talk about and make it a point to say, like, Barack Hussein Obama's appointed judge did this thing. Okay, before you get into all that, how about you just start reading stuff, right? And you don't have to be a historian. You could still come to a pretty decent conclusion just by reading a few documents. I think that I have demonstrated that I understand this document and the rationale behind the decision. I think I understand how to read the U.S. Constitution. I think I understand some of these things very simply. And all I did was read it. I'm just a guy who reads. And anybody can be just a guy or a gal who reads. All right, let's see what we got here. Let's see here. What else we got here? I agree, Keith. The people who break into my home know they may be risking their life to get my TV. It's absolutely true, although I don't recommend necessarily. It depends. Situation depends. Personally, if I'm in my room with my family, I'm not coming out. I'm just going to yell out. This is generally considered good practice. I'm just going to yell out and say, hey, the police have been called. We're armed. Don't come up here because you will not come back down. Right. And, get out as quickly as you can because the police are on the way. That's how I'm treating it. But again, self-ownership. You have the right to make whatever decision on how you want to treat defending yourself and your property and your family that you choose. All right, folks, I hope that you enjoyed this episode, found it informative and inspiring. I want to thank you so much for watching, especially so early in the morning for those of you that are watching right now. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. And look, I'm just going to put the ish in there, right? Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. ish. I really try to start on time. And with rare exceptions, it is Monday through Friday. But every so often, I make a mistake like I did yesterday, and I fail to get up. I probably just needed the extra sleep. I do a lot of running around. I'm a really busy person. So, but again, join me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. I want you to make sure that you are also subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer the Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com. You can also go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, making sure that you're subscribing, while you're there, do me a favor, an additional favor. Throw me in a comment and let me know how I'm doing. I love to read the comments after the fact. And last but not least, I want you to remember, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. But for now, I'm out.